I'm Adam Collins. This is SEO in 2024 Additional Insights.
Adam, what's your additional insights for SEO in 2024?
Predominantly, I wanted to speak today about entity building, or how I usually speak to my team, which is about how do we build brand and how do we build trust in the eyes of Google.
Okay, so entity SEO. What would you say are the key elements to building a successful online entity?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, to give people a little bit of a background, I run an agency. We're not an agency who work with, 3 or 4 customers. We have quite a few customers. So what we're looking to always do is, where can we get the quick wins? And often when businesses come to us, they want guest posts, they want niche edits, they want all these fancy things. And often when you look at them, even very large businesses, their actual entities themselves, there's massive gaps. So what we like to try and do when we're working with people is, initially we do like a foundational phase sprint, is try and figure out where the gaps are, both from an on-page point of view from their entity. So making sure they've got their, about pages, meet the team pages, all that type of stuff. But then also their off-site signals. So really predominantly what we're looking at with that is, their Google My Business, what references do they have online, PR mentions, review websites, all of those types of things. So what we try and do is look at, rather than just looking at the individual website, we're trying to look at things more holistically. And that's really what I meant by holistics, is building brand, or trying to build brand, at least in the eyes of Google. And that's really what we try and do. So at the heart of everything that we try and do for customers, and what I tell my team is, how do we, in a world where sort of AI is producing content at scale, there's scam websites at scale, how do we make it extremely easy for Google to go, all right, this is a trustworthy, real business, they're not there to scam people, and we have all of this external data to support that sort of consensus. That's sort of what our focus is on when we're speaking about sort of entity building, or like I said, sort of building brand.
So I certainly understand that, and it resonates with me. But does it resonate with first-time customers? Because a lot of people have a perception of SEO as being, okay, I'm ranking at number 10 on page 1, get me up to number 1. That's the most important thing to be doing first.
Oh, yeah, 100%. But what I always use the analogy that you want to build a house on dodgy foundations. So what we want to try and do is build the gap. But often what we find is, by doing that, they do get the ranking increases. Because I feel that, so one of the things that we look at is sort of a 3-step approach. So one is like defining the brand on page. So clearly saying what the brand represents, its products and services, and its unique selling points. Surprisingly, a lot of customers and businesses are actually very bad at doing that. So often they'll actually get conversion increases from doing those things, right? But then also the consistency across all platforms, making sure it's consistent, and then obviously looking at things like structured data. So long and short answer is, we try and educate customers who work with us that if you're wanting very quick short-term wins, obviously we do things like quick wins on content, etc. But maybe do Facebook ads, maybe do PPC or whatever. But really what we want to try and do is, we want to work with people not for 3 months, we want to work for people for 12 months or 18 months. So having them understand the philosophy and where sort of Google is and where SEO is, and getting them to buy in for the long term, is something which we sort of prioritize above let's just, scattergun approach the website just to try and get, or let's heavily focus on one singular page. Like, I think that's where a lot of SEOs, I just took a customer on, and they're like, well, we're not ranking for phone systems, or we used to be. And you look at the internal page, and like the one page has like 350 links pointing to it, and everyone else's page on page 1 has like 15 or 20. It's like, you don't need any more guest posts. Like, focus on building the trust and the entity as a whole, and you will probably get that on the back end from doing that. So.
Understood. So you also talked about analysing gaps in an entity. Do you go about doing that on a fairly manual basis? Do you use software to do that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. You can use things like ChatGPT, especially with ChatGPT 4 now. You can ask it to start doing that things. We do it manually with VAs. So I'm always build the processes, do it manually with VAs. We have a number of audit spreadsheets that we do, and then we have a customer's entity type spreadsheet. I'm happy to share that with anyone if they want it. It's just an empty spreadsheet with different types of audits. But what we're predominantly doing in that is trying to look at mainly 5 key areas. One is the backlink side, but we sort of ignore that initially. One is social platforms, like what social platforms do they have, competitors have. Online review platforms, I think, are very important. their local platform citations, consistent app, Google My Business, etc., and then brand mentions like PR, etc. The big recommendation which I would give to everyone is sort of reverse engineer the competition. We try and look for competitors who are ranking, like for like competitors who are ranking with predominantly not crazy high domain rating or just flow, citation flow, whatever it is. So like, what are they doing to get these rankings? And often they have really strong entities. One of the best ways, what I would recommend going about doing that is using Googling the name, using the more about this page in Google, and that will bring up sort of Google's understanding of your entity. It will tell you what your entity name is, etc. And often being able to sort of reverse engineer what they have on there. So, do the competitors have a Trustpilot? Do they have a Crunch? What type of directory site's on there? Because fundamentally, if it's featured on there, there's a very good chance that Google's thinking it's quite important for that specific industry. So we try and do that, and we try and figure out where the consistencies are, and then we compare that to our site or the customer site, and then we go through and start filling those gaps. Fill in the gaps to even the extent of the number of reviews. So if there's a consistent basis of Trustpilot have 50 reviews, we'll work with the customers on being like, right, we should really, if we have 2, we should really start bridging that gap. Same with Google My Business, same with, all of those type of review sites. So that's what we try and do, is fill the gaps, reverse engineer everything.
And that probably leads me to trying to understand a little bit more step 1 of your 3-step approach. So that is defining the brand. What does that actually mean in practice?
Yeah, I think for us, what we're trying to do from defining the brand is understanding the unique selling points, understanding what unique elements there are to that brand, and making sure they're very clearly displayed on the site, usually an about page. We're quite big fans of using the about page as sort of the entity home. And then on the back of that, going and making sure that there's all well and good saying that you're great and that you're award winning and that you've been established since XYZ and whatever else, but then corroborating that information on reference sites. And obviously Jason Bernard is, an expert at this sort of entity type stuff. He has an awesome feature on his website where you can see what the main reference websites are, things like LinkedIn company pages and weight. So starting there is quite a good element as well. Like even things like Crunchbase, I'm trying to think of the other one, which shows like the company information, making sure all those things are corroborating, one fundamental brand message is somewhere where we would start.
Brilliant. Okay, you mentioned guest posts a couple of times as well, and it's not necessary to get any more guest posts pointing to this particular page. What are the good links that you should actually be getting nowadays? What are the key links that you do recommend if you don't see them there?
So we do guest posted. So we have all of the, internal stuff. We do guest posting. We do niche edits internally for our customers. I'm a big proponent of it, but I just feel like it's the go-to, and it shouldn't. I'm not saying it shouldn't be the go-to, but I just feel there's like this obsession with like, how do we just go and chuck hundreds of pounds or thousands of pounds or tens of thousands of pounds on guest posts, and their average guest posts on average sites, with high DR but low traffic, not really relevant. And it's just that sometimes we feel it's a little bit, there's other quick wins. So for us, what we're trying to do is build a diverse foundation layer of links, which we try and do. So Google My Business as first and foremost, making sure that's like fully filled out. Make sure you've got really good 5-star reviews. Make sure you link to all your social profiles on there. A few of the other ones, obviously citations for geo-directories. Again, if we're trying to prove to Google that we're a trustworthy entity, real business, having a consistent name, address, phone number on your citations is very important. Even things like data aggregators, right? Social media profiles. So, I mean, even things down to, I had a customer and they were like, oh, we don't want to do TikTok. And I was like, yeah, but when you search the 3 main competitors to you, they all have TikTok. So isn't it worth it just creating a TikTok and doing a 20-second video saying, coming soon, or YouTube company pages like, oh, I don't want to do video. Okay, well, is it worth just not setting that up? At least having that reference there, especially if it's on page 1 of Google when you're searching your competitors. Digital PR or even syndicated PR, getting those brand mentions is super important. To be fair, there's quite a few. We have a real big list, things like social signals, even as far as like Web 2.0's, Medium and stuff like that, getting articles. Like the big thing what we're trying to do is like look at what do the competition have, especially in the top 3 or 4 pages when you're searching that competitor's name, what websites they get in, and how can we sort of make sure that we tick the sensible ones in that list.
So you've mentioned many ways to build your authority, build your brand, but I don't believe you've mentioned the word blog. Is it still important to have your own blog on your own website as well?
Yeah, 100%. I think, and that again comes down to entity building as well. I think fundamentally what we're big on, doing your topical maps. What we try and say, so we have a topic down approach when we work with customers. So they have to come in, they purchase topic research and subtopic research. So we go, and again, this comes down to the education point which we have with our customers, which is the way we work, which is we're like, okay, what are the primary, 2 or 3 topics you really want to focus on? What are the subtopics? Then from that, what are the keywords? Then secondary keywords, etc. So very much so. I mean, informational blog posts, what we try and do when we're looking at a topic is cover it in its entirety, obviously, and use internal links to push people down the funnel. I think that's a big thing which often people go wrong is, they have topical coverage, but they sort of misconstrue that to having topical authority, and it's not always the case. So yeah, so blogging and again, reverse engineering, right? Matching the intent and making sure that the intent of the page that we're producing is the correct intent to rank for those phrases.
Superb. And how do you report on the success of what you're doing to clients? Because a lot of what you're doing isn't necessarily having a direct impact on the bottom line. You mentioned earlier that entity building can have an indirect result on rankings, but is that just what you focus on, or are there other elements to your reporting?
No. I mean, I report, whenever we take a customer on, I think, again, we try and pride ourselves on being KPI focused, and we try and understand what the business is looking to achieve by leads and all the rest of it. What we're saying to customers is we're not going to completely neglect the foundations just to get quick wins, right? We don't want things to fall over. We want to make sure that it's built on solid foundations. So all of these things are communicated directly with the customers. And then what we will do is we have an entity audit, which we go through and we show them the progress of that. And yeah, we do have to explain to people that it's there's a compounding effect to this type of stuff, and that it isn't as simple as, I think people are very keen on investing at things at the bottom of the funnel, and I think they're very happy to neglect the things at the top of the funnel. And I think something like building brand or building entity is something which is at the top of the funnel and will benefit you for 5-10 years to come. It's worth an exercise to get sorted. But no, you are correct. It's one of the reasons we couple that approach with quick wins. So we do have a quick win type analysis, what we do, where we go through, we try and find these opportunities, we get them improved to show that to the customers, but whilst we're working on a longer term goal.
And you talked about the about page as being the entity homepage. That's obviously going to have structured data on it as well. Is structured data key for other pages on your site as well?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that people should check out, is it Sarah's? She did quite a good one on Schema, and Eureka, she's very good at Schema. So there's definitely better people at Schema than me. We have a lot of success with a WordPress plugin. I won't mention which one it is, a premium WordPress plugin, which does it. A lot of the sites of WordPress obviously can do it by yourself.
You're allowed to mention other software, doesn't it? It doesn't matter.
Actually, what I'm trying to think, is it Schema Pro, WP Schema? I think it's by Brainstorm. It's not the perfect solution, but again, when we're trying to figure out how, again, yeah, writing it by hand could, get us 20% better results or whatever, but it's going to take us, 60, 70% of the time more. But no, we are, but again, using common sense schema, organization or local business schema or whatever, and your homepage, location pages, about schema on the about page, product schema, review schema, etc. So I think the big thing when it comes to entity building or any of these things is, again, we have to remember why we're doing it, and we're trying to do it to make Google's life easier. So using I think it's same as off the top of my head, to make sure that we're sort of connecting the dots. That's what I'm trying to explain it to my team. How do we connect the dots between these? So using same as to link to those either PR mentions, or let's say you've got Wikipedia or Wikidata, or you've been featured on BBC, whatever it may be, or IMDb, whatever. Making sure that you use the same as to corroborate that information, so that Google can then have an internal loop.
And you talked about making Google's life easier. It's not necessarily going to be just Google in the future, of course, with AI and perhaps people receiving the answers that they're looking for just directly without having to visit a website. So does this entity building assist with the evolvements that we're seeing in AI?
I think so, because fundamentally, AI hallucinates, and I understand that the progress curve for AI is incredible. And who knows, maybe Google won't even need, or maybe make Schema redundant one day. I don't completely buy into it. And the reason why is because, again, sort of coming back to one of the initial points I said, like, in a world where there's trillions, like the content's never been produced at scale, there must be more websites now than there's ever been. It must be insane for Google to try and keep track of this stuff. And I think you can see that in the SERPs, with Google struggling to handle different types of the SERPs. For me, don't seem as good as they once were at actually getting your answer. And I feel like it's all about the micro wins. And I think having something there with using something like Schema, which is just completely taken out all the guesswork, right? It's very easy for them to be able to go, right, this is consistent information. We can rely on this, and we don't have to go through and try and figure this stuff out. Because again, I mean, Google's overhead must be insane. So surely they must reward the sites which are making their lives a little bit easier, or you'd hope so anyway.
Is that a little bit greater level of trust that they must have?
You hope so, but who knows, right? Google works in mysterious ways, so maybe not. But I think, like you said, the more that you can do to connect these dots for Google and it go, oh, thank you for making my life a little bit easier, that's going to save me a little bit of processing power, you would hope that there's some sort of reward for that.
So you shared what SEO should be doing in 2024. Now let's talk about what SEO shouldn't be doing. So what's something that's seductive in terms of time, but ultimately counterproductive? What's something that SEO shouldn't be doing in 2024?
Yeah, I think from my experience, SEOs love SEO, and I love that. And I think, the SEO community's got some fantastic people in. But at some point, you have to understand that there's only so many hours in the day, and you're only one person. And I feel like when I see some SEOs, even some people in my team, and I have to bash them over the head and like really force them to make sure that they're going, yeah, I could do this task and it will take me 45 minutes. But you're like, no, let's build processes. Let's ensure that we have a good either in-house team or offshore team. And let's make sure that the SEO is working on the things which truly matter, like the strategy, the overarching strategy, rather than the micro stuff. And I feel like people, especially SEOs, can get very obsessive over, we're going to fix these specific, very, very small tasks, which may only benefit the campaign a little bit. So what I would say to SEOs is try and learn to delegate. If you're doing tasks over and over, just create a spreadsheet of the tasks that you're repeating on a weekly basis and just start working through them going, how could we offshore this? How could we create a simple process to do this? And yeah, we may have to pay a little bit to get it done, but if it's going to give you your sanity and your peace of mind, and for you to focus on other things, then the sort of net ROI is substantially better. And that would be my biggest thing. I think that was the biggest change for me. And it is hard to do, but if you can get someone to do what you would do at 90% as good, maybe it's not going to be as good, then you'll be able to help more people and achieve more results.
Adam Collins is founder at Ignite SEO. You can find him over at igniteseo.co.uk. Adam, thanks so much for adding your additional insight to SEO in 2024.
Thank you, David. Pleasure.
I've been your host, David Bain. You've been listening to an episode of SEO in 2024 Additional Insights, a Majestic series that complements the original SEO in 2024 podcast, video series, and book. Find out more at SEOin2024.com.